Well, thanks, folks. I'm Tom Ivester, an alcoholic, and a member of the Primary Purpose Group, Southern Pines, North Carolina. God knows, that'd get you exhausted, climbing that high. I've quit drinking out of used bottles now. Going high bottom. I want to welcome you to Pockets of Enthusiasm. I don't know why, but I was just thinking about there was a writer by the name of Henry Miller that wrote kind of pseudo, borderline raunchy books. And but he's had a line in a book one time that kind of resonated with me. He said, "He who would find the riches of the Indies must take the riches of the Indies with him." And I would say that about Pockets of Enthusiasm. If you bring a ready spirit and you're prepared to engage in and do what our voice said, you'll have a great experience, even though he didn't want to. By the way, if you need interpreter services for our voice, Jeremy will take care of that. And I would just encourage you to try to keep your focus on what we're doing here. Try to be engaged in this thing. That's what I want to do. And I want to be here physically, mentally, and spiritually, and be as connected as I possibly can. People always ask me if I'm having a good time, and I say, yeah, and I was before I got here. And so what I want to do is keep on doing that here and add to it and add to my circle of friends, and so let's get on with it. I'm an alcoholic, just an average garden variety type of drunk. Don't have anything real heavy or weighty to share. That's probably the good news, because what we share here is our experience, strength, and hope. We don't teach, preach, lecture, condemn, scold, entertain, titillate. All of that's nice stuff. But that's not what this is about. This is about sharing from our heart what we were like, what happened, what we're like now. And that's what I'd like to do. I'd love to tell a drunk-a-log that lasted all night long, because I love them. Man, I flat love them, especially mine. I just get absolutely thrilled with those great days of yesteryear. Could live there forever. I'll visit just enough to kind of put a face on what this wild-looking character was. I'm not a causation freak, but I'm not the village idiot either. And so I don't think I bought my alcoholism in a bootleg joint. I don't think it was just a matter of something I sucked out of a jug. It's certainly a more complex illness than that. Now, I don't go into a whole bunch of stuff, but just suffice it to say that every human being is shaped and developed by the environment they grow up in. That's just rudimentary set stuff. And so everybody does. Everybody has successes and failures and hurts and satisfaction. Everybody does. They're part of what shapes us. All of us take a few knocks from time to time. Sometimes we take a knock or a shot or a disappointment, and we respond to it and become stronger, more able in the process. There are other times when rather than responding, I react and pull it inside and internalize it, and then I become a lesser person. I start to have things that are buried deeply that sort of impair me. So everybody has those experiences, and most people kind of float through them and get through life okay. Sometimes those things become disabilities. They're serious enough that they go below the nuisance level and become disabilities. They start to hamper the ability to be comfortable and to interact and to fit into life. You hear it in almost every speaker that you hear talking AA, and I'm no different. I was somebody like that. Those things are just part of life, and sometimes they go a little deeper and do in fact turn into disabling kinds of conditions. Well, nobody wants to walk around wounded. So not by plan, but just by instinct, some of us develop methods of coping and dealing with those things that make us able to fit in rather comfortably. Later on, we call them defects of character. They influence how we grow and develop. It become real causative kinds of things, I think, in this whole business of why a drink was so important to me, because I was a guy who grew up that way and found life a very uncomfortable place to be. I was always fascinated with booze. I just before I even knew what it was, I was just intrigued with it. My folks tell me I had my first drink and first drunk when I was 2 years old. Now, I don't know anything about it. I think if I'd have been 20, I wouldn't have known anything about it, because my mother tells me that, our family was in the bootlegging business. This was back during the Big Depression. And some folks say they were poor and didn't know it. I knew if we weren't, by golly, I'd like to see somebody that was. And so they went into the liquor making business, and one day a group of them were sitting out in the yard sucking up that stuff, and his mother said I went walking past that circle of drunks, and we're just a strange breed. And somebody said, let's see if the kid will take a drink. Well, the kid did. And she said it was rock and rye whiskey. I don't even know if they still make that anymore. But it has little orange slices and they still make that stuff. Anybody buy it? That's probably what I was going for, but she said I got drunker than Billy Goat, started to take a nap at once. And and when I woke up, they wanted to see if the kid learned the lesson. She said I reached out for it with both hands. Now, I don't think I was a born alcoholic. I don't think that was alcoholic behavior. That was just something that a kid did. But I was always kind of intrigued with it. I was one that would finish off the corners if somebody left them at the table. But it was just sort of trivial experimentation stuff. When I was 16, I got into my first serious drinking with my own whiskey, doing my own thing. And that stuff absolutely did something marvelous for me. It took every one of those imperfections that made life uncomfortable and filled them in and gave me a feeling of adequacy and competency. I could fit into any crowd and take over most of them. And so, man, I would have been stupid to not drink. And so I just took to it. Wasn't an alcoholic. I drank like one. I had all of the problems associated with alcoholism often before I was ever alcoholic. I went to jail, lost jobs, lost cars, got beat up some other folks. Yeah, I did all the stuff that was part and parcel of alcoholism. Wasn't an alcoholic. I was just a guy who found enormous relief in booze and took to it with the logic that always prevailed. More would certainly be better. And so I just sort of hit the ground running. Left home when I was 16. I just wanted to get away from Mama, is what I wanted to do. And I also wanted to see the world. Man, I was tired of that scraping, red, scrabbled dirt farm. And then we really moved up and got into the cotton mill culture. And I really was on top of things then. And so I wanted out. So when I was 16, of course, folks I'd just been 16 for 19 days. And of course, my family, mother primarily, into line for me to get into the military. Went off to the military. Didn't even shave. I did because I felt like a wimp in there. I mean, this is a long time ago. It was in 48. Sounded like the First World War. But it wasn't quite that far back. And about all that was in there was leftovers from the Second World War. And they were a fairly roughed up bunch. And then they had a few of these slick cats from, excuse the expression, from the left coast over there in California, wearing sunglasses at night, fast-talking Yankees. And then there's me, a little old fuzzy cheek kid. I shaved just so I'd fit in. And I did fairly well. When we finished training, out of 1,000 people, I was picked out as one of the 5 best. That still seems ludicrous to me. I was the biggest 8-ball that has ever hit the ground running. And it tells you something about government evaluations when they pick me out. When they announced me, they announced it in front of 1,000 people, Ivester, and everybody around me said, huh? I said, huh? I got you. And I started out to become a leader of men, and didn't do well because I found town about that time, and man, it was on. They saw what they had, and I had a very exotic military career. Always had visions of Hawaii or maybe stationed with Lorraine over in Bermuda, someplace like that. Didn't happen that way. I got sent to what was to become our 49th state, to the now great state of Alaska. That wasn't bad enough. After a short while there, they moved me to Adak in the Aleutian Islands. And if you don't know what the Aleutian Islands are, stay that way, for God's sake. Don't. There's no reason for being. It's just a bunch of rocks out in the Bering Sea. They have no reason for existence. And they stationed me there, a future leader of men. And I'm stationed on a rock in the Bering Sea. I guess I'm supposed to shoot somebody if they try to steal the rock. I'd have given them the thing gladly. Helped them load it. That's where I developed alcoholism. And I swear that water's good. I developed alcoholism. Now, I didn't notice it because I'm sure I was extremely drunk when it occurred. But I have some pretty profound insights about alcoholism. They'll really, you may want to take copious notes on this. I believe, now I don't believe I was born alcoholic. I think I drank a lot because I loved the party. I didn't ever want it to end, and I loved the trashy behavior. I believe, like the book says, that in the first couple of years of my drinking, I could have stopped. But I couldn't think of any reason to. I was having a wonderful time. To the untrained eye, it didn't look like it. But it was really fit me, and I was just having a great time. And I'll tell you something, I would still be doing that, ugly as it was, had I not developed alcoholism. So what happened, I really won't get too deep in this because I can't, but what happened, we usually refer to as crossing a line. It's not written anywhere. That's just sort of folklore. That's just kind of a colloquial term we use to describe what happened. That something happened, the best I can tell, my 18th year, where I crossed that line, and the book describes it better than I ever could in one simple little harmless sounding sentence. It says, we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. That's exactly what happened to me. Exactly. That's where I developed the illness alcoholism. That's where my life changed, irretrievably changed, and will never be the same. Now, what it was that happened, whether it was biochemical, psychological, environmental, social, heredity, I couldn't care less. What I do know, without any doubt whatsoever, is that I crossed into a new zone. I lost the ability to control my drinking. And from that day forward, I could never take a drink and predict what I would do. Now, I didn't pay any attention to that. It didn't look to me like I was doing much worse than I was before. But the drinking changed in the sense that if I took a drink, it was just absolutely unpredictable. And my life just became what seemed like an endless series of just crashing and burning and hitting the wall and getting captured by every means known to man. Set up a pattern of going. We didn't get captured and put in well, we did get put in detox, but they called it jail, and it works very effectively for short-term stuff. So we didn't have capturing programs. If they did, I'd never heard of them. So I got captured by the traditional things that have been here forever. Every once in a while, people would think my behavior was a little weird, and they'd put me in some kind of a place with a net around me and hold me till I got lucid again. Hospitals, I'd come to a hospital with stuff broken that I didn't even know was injured. And I tell you, man, I never hated hospitals. They had to run me out. That was the best place I found. I'd have stayed there forever. And they'd throw me out of those places. And just steadily, quickly going downhill. And when I got, the same guy that started out to be a leader of men was going to make an officer out of me when I went in. 38 months after I went in, I was kicked out as unfit for military service because of alcoholism. That was exactly what was on my, what do they call it, D-214 or something. Whatever that form is that says you go home. And and that's what happened. I'm a 20-year-old young fella, and I'm unfit to serve in what looked like an awfully motley crew, and I'm unfit to serve with them. And I hit the ground literally, and I naturally just kept up the same old junk. And so my life just sort of ratcheted downhill in a hurry. We say sometimes that, I've heard it said, that chains of habit go on so subtly that you don't feel them till they're too strong to break. Now, mine wasn't a subtle process. Nobody would have described it as that. But the process of developing the illness is subtle. And I was in trouble almost past the point of no return before I even realized I was in trouble. And what happened was that every time, from that point forward, every time I would hit the wall and stop and start over, I would ratchet down and ratchet down. Until in a very short time, my serious drinking lasted a total of 8 years. And in those 8 years, I devastated this life and unfortunately some more in the process. And so it was just a quick process, subtle in nature, and it was so gradual, I guess in my mind, that I didn't realize what was happening. It's a strange thing that occurs when alcoholism sets in. There's a place, and I won't kibitz with this too long, but you hear us talking a lot, you don't hear me talking about it, but you hear us talking a lot about denial. That denial is the name of the disease. Well, somebody has renamed it because that isn't what Bill Wilson named it. And if you want to talk about denial, you got to get some outside literature because you won't find it in our literature. And I don't think obviously it was not because Bill Wilson didn't know the word. That guy absolutely knew the language. He knew how to describe feelings par excellence. And I think he didn't use it because it's the wrong word. Because denial is basically an intellectual joust. It's sort of battling away the things that are closing in. What Bill talked about and what describes what was happening uses two words. One is delusion. Refers to it as an inability to differentiate the true from the false. A delusion, just kind of an imaginary fantasy life about stuff. And unable to see the reality that's surrounded. An illusion is just believing stuff that's dead wrong. And so that was the things that he hung his hat on. And that was the thing that was happening to me. Now, I certainly didn't know that at the time. But I know that I got to a point where my life seemed natural. To anybody else, it would have looked bizarre. But I'd see somebody going to work with a lunch bucket, they look strange. I thought the way I lived was normal for me at that time. It fit. And what was happening was that I was just going down and out of sight just about. There's a place, and I really believe that some of us are just more chaotic than others. There's some people that go through life and they go through a career and they fight a battle. God knows I don't envy them. Because it's a desperate battle when you're trying to keep a decent kind of place in society when you got no foundation. You got nothing to hang on to. That's a desperate thing. A case like mine was easier, but a case like mine doesn't last long. Some of us are just chaotic basket case types, and guys like me don't become old drunks. There ain't no way. I mean, somebody would have done me in or have done myself in or something. It just doesn't happen. And so I'm just banging away and going down. When I got out of the military, I drifted up to Flint, Michigan, and God knows you got to be drunk to go there, and particularly to stay. I mean, good Lord. I'd go up there once in a while. If I'm in Michigan, I'll swing by there. It is not deja vu. It is just. I still can't believe I lived there, and it seemed like Mayberry to me. I worked in General Motors till my reputation got in front of me. And in a city of 500,000 people, I wound up unemployable in any industry in the town. And I had a few sort of rocket science type jobs. I had one pulling nails out of scrap lumber. And got fired from the darn thing. Can you believe that? Boy, there's a rocket science for you. And so I just sort of kept on going down. And I'll tell you what I started to say, and I sidetracked myself a little bit, is that there's a dimension in alcoholism that most of us don't even see, much less see it in ourselves, or don't even see it so much in the life we live. But there's a dimension beyond which most of us never go. And there are many who do. And people who just absolutely give up any pretense of living life as it's laid out and just give in to living in that subculture of depravity and the illness of, and when people get into that, they rarely ever come back. Once in a great while, particularly in larger cities, I'll run into somebody, and they don't need to tell me that. I know it, and you'd probably know it too. When you meet them, my hair stands up on the back of my neck because I know I'm looking at somebody who ain't supposed to be here. It's an amazing comeback, and most never do. And so I know that as a young fella, I was perilously close to moving into that dimension before I was 30 years old. In my early 20s, I'd look at myself in the mirror, and the best I could come up with was disgust. Look at myself, just want to throw up. Or my only thought would be, why don't you just end it? You know, those are real winter-type thoughts for a guy in his early 20s, but that's exactly who I was. I gave up any pretense of trying to live in the normal workaday world. I wasn't a criminal per se, but I lived in an environment where the rule of the jungle applied. And it was not a matter of it wasn't criminal behavior, it's just the way the society worked. And in that society, you either were rolling somebody or they were rolling you. And that's not crime, that's just reciprocal trade. You know, they get it from me one day, I'll get it from them the next day. Never thought I'd ever do that. They didn't do that down in Mayberry where I came from. That didn't do that. And by the time I was doing it, it seemed remarkably normal. Never believed I'd get to a point that I'd sell my life's blood, $5 a throw. But that's exactly what I did. I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of using, conniving, taking advantage of good-hearted people. I'm not proud of any of that. I'm deeply ashamed of it. But my prayer is that I never get so caught up in the rapture of my sobriety that I forget it, or that I'm unwilling to share it, because that's the heart and soul of what this is about. And so that was what was happening. And all this happened to me by the time I was 24 years old. There was no such thing as treatment back then that I'd ever heard of. I heard about something that was over in Minnesota after I got sober, but I never heard of that. I guarantee guys like me didn't go trooping in there. And so I'd never heard of any kind of a thing to do, so I'd never tried to do it. And so I'm just banging on. And unfortunately, many folks in here are well familiar with my story. I don't ever have to worry about falling out and having an unfinished melody, because usually 2/3 of the crowd could pick up and just carry right on with it. I hope you don't ever get a chance to practice that, but it's you never know, you know. And but what happened? I'm sure that I would have gone. I predicted morbidly when I was drunk that I wouldn't make it to 30, and I think that was a pretty accurate prediction. And what happened, I wound up doing the kind of nightmare thing that every alcoholic in the world fears doing. I know that. No consolation in it, but I know that. I know there's nobody in this room, unless you're just totally naive, that doesn't recognize the capacity to do exactly what I did. My God. Because what I did, I had been at risk of doing every time I got drunk and drove. And like most people, when I would wake up and get through the panicky stuff, I'd see everything was okay and go do it again. But one morning it wasn't that way. I came to in the Genesee County Jail up in Flint where I was living. And I took it for granted I was there for the same as always, just either drunk or hustling or scuffling or doing, whatever, street behavior. And so when I came to it, I walked up to the bar. The jailer came by. I knew him well. And I said, when can I get out? And he would normally say 10 o'clock, but that day he said, I hope never, and walked off. I didn't know what he was talking about. But then I knew he wasn't kidding. He was serious as a heart attack. And then some of the other guys in there told me the night before I'd been driving somebody's car down the main street of the city and had run down and killed 2 people. And I'm not a subhuman. I'm not somebody who's insensitive to other human beings, even drunk in my maudlin kind of way. But that was news that I could believe, but I couldn't handle. You know what I mean? Logically, I knew I was capable of anything. But inside, I knew that I could not have done something like that, and yet it was undeniable. And I had absolutely no recollection of it, then or ever, to this day. And a strange reaction to that. I guess it's just a protection that the mind does. It just doesn't take information it can't handle, and then gradually accept it as truth. Only time I'd ever been in jail, didn't try to get out. Didn't want out. I was ashamed to get out. I was ashamed to be breathing. And somebody, one of the policemen, for some reason, learned that I had family in North Carolina, took it on himself to call my folk and tell them they had a guy up there in a lot of trouble that was talking himself into more. I was so absolutely beaten by the whole experience that I just tell them anything they want to know. If they want to know something from me, you rob a bank, yeah, sure, yeah, whatever. I mean, I had absolutely no defense against anything, and so they got the family. They came up as families often do, got an attorney and got me released on bond, which I didn't want, but I didn't know how to say it. And I knew. Now, I had never seriously entertained the notion that I might be alcoholic. A lot of other people had entertained the notion, but not me. I never seriously considered it. Thought I was too young. I thought success was just around the corner. I really never believed. I thought I was a worthless scumbag, but I never believed I was alcoholic. Wasn't that bad. And so never had really thought about it. And so when I started to get out, I wasn't thinking about I can't drink. I was thinking that I would never drink again. And I, honest to God, believed that at the core of my being. I didn't think I could pick up a drink. The guilt was too great. And it was a foreign thought to me. I didn't understand anything about alcoholism. I was released on bond on July 17 of 56. And on July 18th of 56, I was as drunk as any human's ever been. Tried my best to stay that way till I got put away. And the 19th of November of 56, next week will be the date of my last drink. That's not the date of my recovery. I didn't get into the program till the following February, but that's the date of my last drink. It'll be coming up, and it's always significant, but it's not about recovery. That's about not drinking. And so on the 19th of November, I was scheduled to go to court. And it was not a court in terms of defense and prosecution. I had no defense. The hell of a blackout is that you've got no defense. You can't even tell somebody what you've done or profusely deny that you did it. You're just a blank. And so I never heard of this. And Cliff probably had, but I never heard of this plea. But my attorney said, enter a plea of stand mute. And I thought since, that what an eloquent plea for a crime committed in a blackout. What else can you say? Stand mute. And that's what I did. I was found guilty, of course, and sentenced to a max of 15 years, a 5 to 15-year sentence in the Michigan State Penitentiary. Now, I'd never been to a penitentiary. I'd been to innumerable jails, but that's a different deal. Overnight drunk tank or 30 or 60 days in a stockade isn't quite the same thing. And so I had never been to it. I'd never seen what a penitentiary looked like, I imagined. And I had a number of friends who were in and out of the place, so I knew it wasn't the Holiday Inn. And they were some pretty scurvy people if they hung around with me. And when they passed that sentence, I remember that as clearly as if it were today. I had an instinctive, I guess very natural reaction of fear. Just natural, human nature. And at the same time, the most real sense of relief I had ever known, because I knew it was done. It was over. Now, I'm not talking about a new day or a new start or we'll regroup and get it going. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the peace that comes when you know it's done. I've heard people describe near-death experiences and how they felt when they thought they died. And that's what I'm talking about. That was just absolutely, it's done. There won't be any more. And next day, went into that penitentiary at 4000 Cooper Street in Jackson, Michigan. The state prison in southern Michigan at Jackson, at that time was the largest walled institution in the world. And the day I walked in there, I remember that day. I remember it very clearly. I was chained with 5 other guys, took me in there, and I knew when I walked in I would never walk out. I absolutely knew that. And I'm convinced to this day, had I gone in there left to my own devices, had I gone in there and tried to survive with my street behavior, I don't think I'd have lasted till sundown. Because there was some raunchy folk in that place. I mean, this place was inhabited by folks from the worst towns in Michigan, and the worst of the worst towns were there. I was one of them, so I in a way I fit right in. Normally a 24-year-old guy with what they call a casual offense, that's what they call a crime like that. A crime that's a direct result of your alcoholism is referred to as a casual offense. There's nothing casual about it, but that's as opposed to premeditated type of committed behavior, planned behavior. And normally they didn't put people like with that kind of a sentence in a place like that. But my history, I think, demanded it, that I was really a kind of a wild, crazy guy. And I guess they knew that. So they kept me in there. I never got out. I stayed in maximum custody the whole time I was there. And the day I walked in, that was exactly the way I described it. I was a guy that was almost devoid of any feeling, of any kind, either fear or anxiety or hope. I was just a shell of a man that was just being filed away like so much human wreckage. And I'm absolutely convinced. I mean, it's kind of a moot point, but I'm absolutely convinced that had my turning in a different direction depended on any initiative demonstrated by me, I would have never done it. I would have never done it. If I'd had to request to go to AA, if I'd had to ask for help, I would have never done it. And it's not because I was too proud or too arrogant. Probably some of that, but the core reason was that I was so unworthy and so full of guilt, I wouldn't ask anybody for a drink of water. Never mind to get involved in my life. I would have never done it. And I'm absolutely convinced of that. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so grateful for those who go beyond the comfort zone of their own sobriety and reach out actively to others. John does some of that stuff. I'm really grateful for people who bother to try to see that drunks who hit the wall know where to come, that the people who take care of them know what to tell them. Because had that not been in place where I was, my story would have been a lot different, a lot different. And what happened, if you can picture that guy, now when they put me in a cell, I was always essentially an isolated guy. You would have never known that by looking at me go through my antics. But deep inside, I was a totally isolated, shut down guy. I just made a lot of noise. And so when they put me in after all of this, they'd lock me up in a cell, and I just sat there. I was just like a noodle. I was just sitting there. I was totally shut down. I wasn't antisocial. I was asocial. I didn't interact with anybody. I didn't know who lived in the next cell on either side. And it wasn't I didn't care. They just didn't exist. And so that's where I stayed. But one day, what started to turn it around was a fellow that worked there called me out for an interview, and I'd had many of those. And he went through the same thing. He asked his standard question, and I'm sure I told my standard lies. But it works. And when he got through, I know he was a rookie of a guy. He graduated from Michigan State, and I don't know if he could really spell AA, but but somebody had told him, when you see a guy and he's got a record like that, 3 inches thick, and it's all about booze, tell him he ought to go to AA. That's exactly what he did. Now that's not really advanced psychiatry. That's just plain old horses, man. And that guy, now I'd had a lot of people exclaim over my drinking. I'd been pronounced alcoholic by a lot of people, or drunk, or problem drinker. Go on. I mean, I'd had plenty of that, and they would always tail off to something like, "Why don't you quit drinking?" Well, I could never quite get a handle on that. I just never did have any real premium on not drinking. Jesus, drunk was bad enough. And so that never made any sense to me. Nobody ever suggested anything about what you'd do if you did think you had a problem. That hadn't come along yet. And so this guy got through with his deal, and he said, "Man, you've had a lot of trouble with booze." And I said, "Yeah." And that was obvious. And he said then something I never heard. He said, "We have an AA group here at the institution. I think you ought to go." Now, it wasn't a command or an order or saying if you ever want to be free, you better get there and do something. None of that. Absolutely zero pressure of any kind. It was just a sort of a friendly suggestion. "Man, you've had a lot of trouble. There's a group here. You ought to go." And then he sent me a little note a little later and said you had to be on a list to go in there, because if it was 6,000 guys in the joint, you know there was a fair number in the group. There's 300 max in that group, and it stayed full. And so you had to be on a list. And so he told me I could go to my first meeting, February 2nd of 57. And I walked in. I was just thrilled to be going. I was not thrilled to be going. And it wasn't so much a distaste for AA. I didn't have a clue what AA was. I think somebody, he didn't, but I think somebody had told me it stood for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I tell you, that's not the most heartwarming title I have ever heard for something you want to join. I mean, who the devil wants to join Alcoholics Anonymous? Secret drunks, you know. Now that didn't conjure up visions of joy, you know. And so I wasn't thrilled about it, but I was so withdrawn and isolated. The last thing an isolated person wants to do is to get into a whole bunch of hearty handshaking and stuff. And so that's not what I wanted. I wanted to sit in that cell and stare at my navel is what I wanted to do. But I just went. Thank God for being beat. Thank God for surrender. Because I was so beaten to my soul that there was no fight left. There was nothing. I couldn't even muster an argument. And so I wandered into that first meeting. One guy spoke to me. 300 guys in that group. One guy had an officer on the door. Ivester, yes, sir, sit down. Sat down, listened to my first meeting. And it was much like most meetings. It was a speaker meeting. They read all the stuff. I had a real morbid fear that it was going to be some kind of a religious hootenanny. I just felt it coming. I'd seen a bunch of clean old folks come down to the county jails a lot of times and sing Amazing Grace and all that stuff. And I'd always battle and go through every conversion they offered. And they'd probably last 30 minutes. And so I figured this had to be something like that. I mean, they're not going to have some sort of a logical discussion here. This is going to have to be a lot of high emotion and drum beating and snake shaking or something. And so I walked in. First thing they did was pray. Did that serenity prayer first thing. It ain't a big prayer, but it's a big one to a guy like me. And while they were praying, I was saying to myself, "See there, I knew it. I knew it." That's exactly what it is. Then they turned the speaker loose, and that guy told his story. You think mine's wild? I mean, that guy was a bad drunk. I mean, that dude bordered on crazy. And so he's telling, and all the time he's telling that stuff, I thought, why is he doing that? I mean, why would you come in there with 300 hairy-legged convicts and bare your soul like that? That made no sense to me. I mean, that Brother's Keeper stuff had been dead with me for a long time. And I didn't think anybody on this planet helped anybody without a hook in it. That's what I believed. And I said, what is he doing here, for God's sakes? And when he left, I didn't identify with one syllable of one word. And when I left, I was probably more confused than I was when I went in. And the next week, I was back. Nobody sent for me. Nobody would have looked for me if I hadn't been there. But something happened, and I think what communicated, I'm grateful for the name of this conference, Pockets of Enthusiasm. I'm grateful for the spirit of enthusiasm, because that's the thing that brought me back to my second meeting. Now, I'm not talking about cheerleader rah-rah, but this guy was absolutely the most fired up person I've ever seen. I'd never seen such a spirit, that this guy barely could contain himself when he spoke. And so that spirit is what I responded to. Not the story, for God's sakes. I never identified with his story. He became my sponsor about a year later. But it took a year for me to realize he was actually speaking English. He was, but that spirit, that magnetic spirit, it just sort of drew me. And I'm not talking about my heels drug in, digging furrows in the yard, but something just pulled me back. And I found myself sitting there, and that started the odyssey of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was miserable. I did not fall in love with AA. Some people, I hear them talk about their first meeting and how they felt like home at last. Good God, I felt like I was on a shipwreck or something. I didn't identify with anybody in there. This was a long time ago, and 24 was a child in 1957. And most people in that room had drunk more years than I was years sober. And so I really felt out of place. I was in AA for 2 years before I ever identified with one single person who spoke. 2 years. And it may or may not seem strange to you, the first person I ever identified with had never been in jail in his life. My problem is not being locked up. I'm not a member of Convicts Anonymous. I'm an alcoholic. And the first person that I identified with was a guy, he was so scared, I think somebody conned him into coming to that prison. I don't think he knew where he was going. And the first thing you know, he was in there, and that poor man was so scared. All the time he was there, he kept looking behind him to see if anybody was sneaking up on him. And they just forced him to get up and speak for very few minutes. And he got up, and he just sort of shook out the best he could what he had to say. First man I ever identified with. Oh, what he talked about, in a few words, was a destroyed life. Not how many times he'd been locked up. That's got nothing to do with alcoholism. That's just product of drunk. That's just not how many times his nose broke and if he'd ever been hit. He was a Mr. Clean. But on the inside, he was a dead man. His life had died on the inside, just like mine. Mine had a lot of circus qualities to it. He probably did it in the living room of his home. But I identified with that gangrene of the soul that he talked about. And so I was the first guy. And so I didn't have any sort of a magical turnaround in the program. I am deeply grateful that I was that I went into an excellent group. The recovery group at Jackson, at the State Prison of Southern Michigan in Jackson, was an excellent AA group, the recovery group. And they did, what I mean by that, they did a wonderful job of understanding and carrying out the fifth tradition. And if you hadn't caught on that fifth tradition, it simply says that every group, and I think every member, has but one primary purpose: to carry his message to the alcoholic still suffers. And they did a great job of that. They didn't just sit back and respond if you spoke to them. Did a great job. They peeled off new guys and introduced them to what the steps were about. They didn't take them through like we do these days, but they certainly introduced me to the logical design for living that is the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I started to just slowly emerge and start to have some feelings. Started to just sort of inch my way into this thing. I didn't believe I was alcoholic. I said I was because I hated to be the only something else in the crowd. And so they'd say they were. I'd say, yeah, me too. But it didn't mean a thing. I thought alcoholism was a moral thing. I didn't think it was an illness. And I thought what was wrong with me is that I was just a worthless, no good, undisciplined, irresponsible guy. That is truly what I believe. When I heard people talk about it's the first drink that gets you, I thought that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. I never had anything happen to me when I took the first drink. It sounded to me like alcoholics took the first drink and they had a running fit, and ran away from home or something. I didn't do that. All I did when I took the first drink was have another drink. And then a whole bunch more. And then wind up running away from home or in jail in Alabama or somewhere. So, but I didn't understand that, and so it was a slow process for me. And back then there was no such thing as sort of studiously taking people through the program. It just didn't happen. And the fellow who did the history today could tell you about those early days, that those were rock'em sock'em days. The name of the game then was action. Action. Now, you read the book if you get a break between drunks, but the name of the game when I got here was go get 'em, Tiger, and you read later. If you used the book to lay their head on or something like that. So there wasn't a whole lot of real studious work back then. It was real solid action interspersed with some sort of grabbing hold and getting the program. But it started to finally take shape with me. And a huge turning point for me was, I don't like to aggrandize anything in the program, but a huge turning point for me was I was just fumbling my way through. The first 3 steps, they're pretty easy to get through. You can shuck and jive all you want to on the first 3 because all you got to do is agree with them. And, of course, you ain't kidding nobody but yourself, but that's just real easy. I mean, if you say you've done it, you've done it. But that's over when you get to 4. I'm taking 20 people through the steps right now, and we moved into step 4 just a while back. I reminded them last Tuesday night that they were just finishing up 3, and man, it'd been like I could just see them kind of looking at each other. Hey, man, this ain't bad. Shoot, this is it. Then we got into 4, and you've heard the phrase, "A hush came over the crowd." A hush came over because we're getting into some serious stuff. And that's what happened to me. I did a wonderfully effective 4-step. It wasn't a classic. It wasn't one you'd want to publish anywhere, anything like that. What it was a tortured young fellow with alcoholism, with a past that barely could stand to be looked at. That's who it was. And what I did was just came to a point where I opened up and poured out my heart on paper. Had 3 pages of hopeless scribble. Nobody could have read it. Nobody's supposed to. Tell you this, almost 49 years later, that's the most important day's work this guy has ever done in his entire life. Total changing point in my life. I did a second, I've done 3 inventories. I'm not suffering from analysis paralysis. That's not my deal. I did a second one, and at that time I did it more studiously and analytically using columns and, sort of going a little deeper into it. But it didn't have nearly the impact of the first one because what I did was poured out my heart. And that's the first honest look I'd ever taken in my life. And that day, I knew without any question whatsoever that I was alcoholic, period. Not the young guy, the tragic case, or the whiz kid, none of that. I was alcoholic. I accepted at the core of my being, just like it says in that little squib in the third chapter somewhere, that I conceded to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic. And my friends, that went deep because I have never doubted that for 1 second to this night. That was a changing point in my life. I'm one who seriously believes that surrender is extremely important for long-term recovery. And that fight was done. That fight was done. It was over. Never to return. I am like any other human being to any examiner. If you put me through an MRI, I don't come out with something different than other people. And my physical illness is done as long as I don't take 1 drink. And it'll never bother me if I don't bother it. And what I'm left with is what the rest of the 4th step talks about. And the stuff I started out with. Those little things I mentioned that sort of put the dents in the psyche, put the dents in the character, kind of warped the development. See, what those things generated were those kind of coping tools. Like I became an inveterate liar. I didn't take it up because it was fun. It was a survival thing. I was somebody who carried around an inordinate amount of guilt, an inordinate amount of insecurity, an inordinate amount of fear. And so what this step is about is getting down to those causes and conditions, It's getting down to where this thing generates. And that's what was so important about that step. And so when I made a beginning in that first one, and then have spent many years afterward in dealing with the process of restoration that follows. Tremendously important place. Now, I don't single out steps. I think the steps are a package deal. The best illustration I've ever heard of the steps is that little thing in that introduction to the 12 and 12, where it says this: our steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature. It tells us what they are. Which, if practiced as a way of life, hear what that's saying. If practiced as a way of life, not worked or done or recited or taped or any of that, those are nice tools. But it says the key is if practiced as a way of life. Will do 2 major things. One, it will expel the obsession to drink. sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. I had obsessions a few times within my first 6 years of sobriety. I haven't had one now for over 42 years. But I guarantee you I don't count myself done with it, because I have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. That's what I am. I have a mind that can, has, and might again turn irresistibly to the thought of a drink, and no human power, especially mine, will be sufficient. And that's not a theory with this guy. I know that on the anvil of experience. What that step does was give that solid foundation. I know I've never really been involved in a long-term recovery with anybody that was not based in surrender. And to me, that's where that really fell into place. And from that day to this, I've never questioned my condition, and I've never questioned my membership. I became a solid member of Alcoholics Anonymous that day. And I'm not somebody who shops around for some nice place to go. I take the riches of the Indies with me. And I guarantee you, I don't go to bad meetings. I go to some that are trying desperately to be bad meetings. But I'm not going to let them get away with it if I can help it. You know, when I go to one of those stem winder, let's seek out our child. When I get into one of those, I never leave. I mean, I want to work inside the tent, man. I don't want to get out and throw bricks. And so I just sit there. And if they make the mistake of calling on me, I never say one word about anything that's been said. In fact, I act like I don't even know what has been said. I become deaf, dumb, and blind about that. And then I proceed to share whatever comes out that has to do with recovery or solution. And so far, I have never one single time done that in a meeting and seen the meeting go back to what it was. See what I'm talking about? Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fall in and get into that hum-along business with that kind of stuff. I'm going to try to be an example. Another name for that is leadership. It's not bossing, it's just setting an example. And most people in a meeting like that are just frustrated as I am. And so as soon as something comes up to latch onto, so I just don't go to bad ones, and so I'm a real member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It doesn't matter where I am. I'm a strong home group type of guy. I'm a functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It used to be. I don't make ceremonial appearances. I've never gone to a meeting from that day to this without knowing why I'm there. I know why I'm here tonight. I absolutely know what my job description is. I told you in the beginning. I'm not here to educate, scintillate, titillate, nothing. I'm here to share how one alcoholic was broken and was healed by the amazing grace of God working through this program. That's what it's about. And then I won't have time to go much further. How are we doing that, Gary? Well, no, Sharon's coming on. God knows. Sharon is wicked. I just won't be able to tell you everything. Let me just tell you this, and then I'll get you into the corral. An awful lot of people come to the juncture of inventory, and will tend to get through inventory, and then get into 6 or 7, and then an awful lot of folks will opt out to a kind of a lightweight maintenance program, where it's fixed around the notion that you go to meetings and the meetings solve the problems, and that's what AA is about. And a recovery that goes that way, in my judgment, is an AA that's shortchanged. That's a recovery that's shortchanged. Because from the point of 6 and 7 forward, including 6 and 7 really, it's about restoration. It's about recovery and restoration. It's about getting rid of those things that drag behind me when I come here and continue to nibble at me. And if I don't get rid of those things, if I don't go back and make right all the wrongs with the people, places, institutions, and whatever that I screwed over and messed up, I will never be a free man. And so those steps are about restoration. They're about getting restored to my place in this world, so I can take my place there and and it can do very good work. And I'm a free man. And that's what happens in those things. today. I had the great privilege of one of the few privileges of being old is I had the chance to meet our founder, Bill Wilson. Now, we weren't fishing buddies, not at all. But I went to my first international in Toronto in '65, and my primary motive was one of my major motives was to meet Bill. And I didn't want to say anything to him. I think I just wanted to touch him, just make sure he was really there. Because that guy was larger than life to me. And so I sat in a meeting with him, and he was talking about this aspect of the program. He was really talking about anonymity, but he was talking about this aspect of the program. And what he said has rung in my ears ever since. He said, if I do what's laid out in the 200 words of the steps, what will happen is I will get restored to my rightful place in this world. I'll be able to achieve my maximum potential. And man, the guy was right. He said, there'll come a day when I will be able to walk the face of this earth and look any human that I meet in the eye. You can call that what you want to, but that's freedom. That's freedom. Come a time when you can say to anybody, ask me anything you want to ask me. I've told you just a little bit. Ask me anything. I've got no secrets. If I've got it, you got it. That's freedom. And that's what those steps are about. As long as I've got guarded kind of junk and I'm living in some little old narrow glass prison that, I'm not going to know freedom. I'm going to know survival in a very small stream. And so what happened, I just gave myself to this simple program. And man, I'm telling you, has it ever worked? Good God. In a maximum custody penitentiary, I enjoyed every benefit that can come to a human being in AA. I became free. I experienced first happiness, first joy, first dignity I ever had in my entire life. And a maximum custody, locked up like a wild animal. Because that's not where freedom comes from. It comes from inside. And so every joy was done there, and it's just been a matter of keeping on, and I've experienced them in a lot of places now. The only thing I'll tell you just to close on, and apologize for not telling you the rest of the stuff about getting rich and famous and all that. I'll tell you what I'll close on is what I started on about the value of enthusiasm. I don't tell this, but I'm 73 years old. God, that is old, man. I'm the guy who wasn't going to make 30. I'm 73. And I am wide open. I'm telling you, I've got more energy. I have never sponsored a soul that could keep up with me. And I'm not racing anybody. I've got a lot to do. I've got a lot to do in this little bit of time I got left. And I'm somebody, if you got any notion about whether enthusiasm can become real and whether your life can light up and you can rocket into the fourth dimension, you ask me about that. Because it'll be 49 years in February, I am more enthusiastic about Alcoholics Anonymous today than I've ever been. More dynamically involved, more creative. I've got more energy. I've got more stuff going than I've ever had. The folks that tell you the pink cloud ends are lying to you. It ends when you quit doing what puts you there. As long as you keep doing it, man, this thing will light up like a Roman candle. So go get them.